Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Twitter space today on orb design. We'll give everyone just a couple minutes. I think we've got a speaker or two coming online now in the space, but I'll kind of get started. I see them joining just to give everyone a little bit of a background. Today, we're going to talk about something that's really unique to the Worldcoin project, which is the design and development of the orb. For background, Worldcoin is building the largest identity and financial network, and we're doing it as a public utility. And the intent is to give ownership to everyone. Now, the key for us is giving ownership to everyone. Like, how do we do that? So that actually necessitates a way to identify everyone as a unique human, not which specific human, but in fact that you are a unique human, so you can participate in that manner in these networks. This led to the design and development of a hardware device we have called the orb, which is what we're here to talk about today. I'm super excited about this. I'm a huge fan. Usually I'm on calls related to the protocol itself, but I kind of volunteered to be the spokesperson here. My name is Stephen Smith, by the way. I'm the head of protocol for the Worldcoin project. I work for Tools for Humanity. I'm pleased to have with us today Thomas Meyerhoffer, who's the lead designer of the orb, and Sandro Herbig, who is the head of engineering for everything related to the orb. So I'll pause there and ask Thomas and Sandro to give an intro and to their background, and then we'll get going.
Hi, everybody. Do you want me to start?
Yes, that'd be perfect.
All right. So my background is I'm a designer for probably 25 years now. One of my first jobs was with Apple, where I was there when Steve Jobs came back. And Johnny Ive and I worked on the iMac, for example. After that, started my own design studio, and I've been working in a really broad range of different types of designs for different types of needs. And lately, I've been working a lot with startups. I find it very interesting to see how design can help the startup to become successful and it can reach people and really make a difference. So I've been working with a couple of startups, and now, of course, with Worldcoin, which is a great project.
Hey everyone, Sandro. Been working on the project basically since its founding more than 3 years ago. I spent most of my time, as Steven mentioned, on the orb, and of course been working very closely together with Thomas. And I'm on the complete opposite side of Thomas. My background is in theoretical physics, so very different on design. And it's been a really fun journey, and it continues to be a very fun journey to work together on the design of the orb. Looking forward to the space.
Very good. As usual, Thomas and Sandro are a bit understated in their accomplishments and everything. Thomas was just instrumental to a number of the designs at Apple. And as he mentioned, the iMac, which was just really, arguably, you could say, I think kind of turned Apple around. That may be like overstated. I don't know. Everyone thinks of Apple so highly with all their great, phenomenal products and designs. But the iMac was actually very pivotal in that. And then Sandro is, quite honestly, not to embarrass him, like one of my most favorite humans in the world. He's like the nicest, hardest working person you could possibly be on a team with. Incredibly brilliant. We'll talk more, obviously, about the design of the orb and some of the technology within the orb, but it's just a phenomenal, piece of hardware. I did want a housekeeping note I should have brought up at the very beginning. We will do our best to leave some time toward the end of the call for audience questions. Yeah, just drop those in the Twitter thread if you have any, and we'll do our best to get to those at the end. I'm sure we'll have a few minutes. Yeah, toward the end and we just want to keep this light and like the conversation. As I mentioned, I'm a huge fan. With that, we'll kind of hop in. Our first section is really to talk about the exterior of the orb. So it's a really unique device. And if I didn't mention it at the beginning of the call, Leo Schwartz of Fortune referred to the orb as perhaps the most iconic piece of hardware since the iPad, which is really a huge statement. So let's just start with the exterior, what the orb looks like. So Thomas, how did you come up with the design?
I think it's a crazy idea, which is always very good. That for me makes it very interesting, and have been in Silicon Valley and part of many other projects is I kind of learned through the years that if somebody has such an ambitious, crazy idea as this is, it's worth listening and try to understand is like, how can I help? Okay, is there something we can make better and possibly maybe reach this goal we have? So that's sort of really was the start of my curiosity towards this project. And I think the other part was, as you introduced Sandro, and it's diversity of cast in the project. It's an amazing group of people which are all experts in these different areas. And that's another thing I think I learned through the years is that the broader sort of knowledge base the project has, the better. So you have somebody who's an expert in an area which you don't know anything about, and you can actually have an exchange, which is very valuable. And the opposite of that would be to have be part of a group of 20 designers trying to design a new cupboard cup, for example, which is completely, in my mind, useless and it's already been done. So I think this project is absolute opposite of that. It's this group of really amazing people who came together to try to make this project happen. And I'm happy to be the only designer, which I really truly enjoy, because I think that's where you can contribute the most and actually make the biggest difference. So that's the background of why I found this interesting. And when you do something like this, which is a special project, again, you want to come up with a very iconic symbol of the project. And of course, we did, the sphere. And it's never been done before. Like you mentioned before, I worked in this famous fruits company, which does all these computers in different shapes and forms. And we never made a sphere because it's very hard. And suddenly I find myself working together with Sandro and Alex, the CEO, and everybody who, have been part of this, and the engineering groups and everybody, which just suddenly says, yeah, we want to do this. We want to make this different object. And I'm like, whoa, all right, let's try to make this happen. So the sphere has survived itself, and it became also, I think, internally a symbol for us to try to make this the project we wanted it to be. And therefore it has grown into something which we all working together to keep. And I have said, I don't know, Sandro, how we managed to keep this a sphere. After all these years we've been working on this, it could so easily have become a box. And of course, we've seen a lot of boxes before. And I think that's one of the things is that this is, for me, I wanted something really a fresh icon of a project, which is a really fresh approach to a really fundamental problem. And the icon of that is obviously the sphere, but now it's our job, which I find even more interesting. It's our job to fill the icon with meaning by making the project a reality and the targets we have a reality of reaching all these people doing this really good thing. So that's my overview of how I think about it.
Excellent. Yeah, we're going to talk about the interior next. And I really want to hear from Sandro on that, some of the challenges of working within, a spherical device like that. But on the design, Thomas, what can you tell us what's unique about the tilt? If you've ever seen an orb, or even in fact, if you've just seen a picture of an orb, like sitting on a tabletop or something, it's got a unique tilt to it. So what inspired that, and what is the significance of that unique tilt?
Yeah, first of all, we want to keep the simplicity of the object. So you want to keep it very spherical, but there is, as a designer, you always have to work with the needs of the people who are going to use it. And in this case, you want the object to look at the person. And we had the ability to turn it inside, all the componentry inside the orb in a certain angle, and rotate the structure inside. And I choose to do that at the angle of the Earth, the tilt of the sort of 23.5 degrees. So it's more symbolic. But I think the more we work on this project, the more planetary it has become. It's sort of quite inspirational for me to see how this sort of planetary idea of mixing science and the arts goes back so many hundreds of years of trying to make change in the society. So you do that with the arts and together with the technology and then sort of the engineers and the other pieces. And then in the end, you can actually create change. So many of the pieces we've been working with have then been, the target has always been, and the challenge has been to keep it quite orbital and planetary and global in its feeling and meaning of the object.
Yeah. By the way, we have a blog post we recently put out on designing the orb, which has some of this information in it, which is a great read. It's got some pictures of the orb, if by chance you haven't seen one. But Thomas, you have a quote in there that I really loved. I think it is a great summary, basic of what you just said. It says, "It must be simple enough to speak to all of us, and by all of us, everyone all around the world." And I just really love that. And it leads into something. It's a little bit more. And I'm not a designer. I have no designer background. That's why I'm a huge fan. But you also mentioned that you mentioned that something called the device's necessary universality. And I was just wondering if you could just explain that a little bit for folks that maybe don't have quite the strong design background.
Yeah, for sure. The job, as I see it, of a designer is to put yourself in the shoes of the user, and the user in this case is it's everybody, which is an enormous project by itself. Normally, in any quote unquote commercial project, you have a target group and all these other things. This project is for everybody, truly for everybody, everywhere in the world, different cultures, different age groups, and they all see this object ideally as a symbol of what this project means for them. So therefore, it has to intuitively speak to people from different cultures, different age groups, and so forth in a tone and a voice which gives them something they can connect with our project. And that's why it needs to be this way.
All right, excellent. And then just one last kind of question from me on design, and then we'll shift to talk about the interior and some of the challenges there. And this is a great segue into that, I think. But another aspect of the design was you made a comment earlier about things could have easily turned into a box. Like boxes somehow become a little easier to work with, but you wanted to preserve the sphere and because of all that represented. And one of the challenges also is to realize the goal we have of reaching, such a vast population on Earth. You can't have an orb that requires like a truck to move around. So one of the goals was to keep it reasonably portable. So just wondering if you had any comments on that or additional color you could add to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously been a challenge to keep it in the form factor we have. And as a designer is one of those jobs where people think it's a great job and you're so lucky you can sit there and do all those nice things and choose the color of the object and all of these things. But that's not really what you do as a designer, because you have to work with the architecture of the product. And you have to work with engineers to understand what components are on the inside. And then you have to build something around that, and you have to work together. If they shift something on the inside, just 10 millimeters, it would affect the outside. And you can't just say, oh, you can't do that, but you have to understand, why do we need to shift this thing on the inside? Can we do it in slightly other way? Because if we do, then it will affect all these other pieces, which then will change the outside. And that conversation, Sandro and I have had now for 3 years, which has been a really great conversation. And I think we now found this sort of spot where it makes sense. And part of that is obviously the overall volume of the object and the overall weight and like the portability. This is always a project where, of course, in the start, you will be in the cities. And then to reach everybody, you need to go all the way out there and have to find the people if you're really going to truly reach everybody. So it needs to be really mobile. It needs to be something you can carry with you. And, if you, as we all know, you probably have a balloon and you'll be blowing it up. If you just blow it a little bit bigger, it gets much bigger. And if you add a 10 millimeter, because somebody said, oh, we need a bigger battery, it's going to be this much bigger, then the whole object has to be that much bigger, and volume is whatever in equation wise makes it a lot bigger. So that's just one of the symbols, I think, why this is such a sort of comprehensive object right now, where we've really been considering all of those things all the way through to keep it mobile, to keep it portable, keep it something somebody can carry and bring with them and meet somebody somewhere to make them part of the project.
Excellent explanation. And again, a great segue. So we've established the challenges of a sphere, at a high level, and also the challenge of this device really needs to be portable, and you have to make decisions based on millimeters in some cases because of the overall impact on the design. So, Sandro, shifting gears, this is obviously challenging. So, first question really I had for you, you started with this not restriction, but design goals to make this phenomenal device work within the context of the sphere. So, what role did that play in developing the tech that went into the orb?
Yeah, it definitely played a major role. Sphere is certainly not an engineer's first choice. As Thomas mentioned, it could have easily become a box, and like you'll laugh, but it came up a lot. It'd be so much simpler. As like, how about we just make it a box and make our lives a lot easier? Like, it'll still work, right? But then Thomas comes like, no, it's actually not the same. And we bought into that, had a lot of back and forth discussion. It wasn't that easy to really make it work in the end, especially while keeping it constrained to, you talked about portability. I think the goal we were optimizing for was something around 8 inches in diameter. And back then we were still quite a small team. So it took quite a lot of effort, but it was worth it. It takes a lot of effort to create something special and meaningful, I think. So we were excited to make this happen.
The orb, our orb design open out there. We actually had a great blog post on that as well. But if you're into like optical technology and cameras and lenses and sensors and things of that nature, that is definitely worth your time just to dig into to appreciate the device. And one of the things I've really enjoyed since joining the project was going with Sandro to like talk to different partners and things. And some of those partners will be really interested in a deep dive on the tech in the orb and just hearing Sandro explain it and all the things that, we're also going to talk about the evolution of the orb in a bit, but how it evolved over time. But what were some of the like specific engineering challenges, Sandro, you had to overcome in order to keep this design? Like you said, we talked about it'd be great if this was just a box, but it wasn't. And what are some of those specifics? Was it around battery or lenses or lighting, or what might be some examples?
Everything.
Yeah.
That covers it well. Yeah. There were even just like some ports we just completely had to find replacements for some of the capacitors. So like electronic for the lighting, they were like simply too big with a spherical shape that fit in a larger design previously. So like we just had to replace them. And I think the engineering team mostly took the challenges with humor. And we like sometimes joked that I think it was like a famous quote from Steve Jobs. If you can throw it in an aquarium and there's still bubbles coming out of it, that means there's still room for improvement. There's still empty space in there that you could allocate more efficiently. We're not exactly there. If you throw an orb in an aquarium today, there's still bubbles coming out of it, but we certainly pushed it. I think that was one. The optics, of course, was challenging. In the end, we actually found a lens that fit rather comfortably inside. This wasn't that clear in the beginning, but the custom lens we designed together with a machine vision specialist made this much easier in the end. A big challenge, of course, was to make everything look very simple from the outside when it's not really from the inside. There's lots of different LEDs, different sensors to evaluate and prove that somebody's human and unique. So that was one. Then there's actually like a detail on the first version of the orb, which we're evolving later, but in a future version. But in the current version is like the surface, the glass surface that's above the optics. It's actually not flat. That's yet another like box versus sphere example where like at the flat glass, like it would have been so easy. It would have been the dream. But then of course it's not special. And like I think Thomas was talking about, even the glass of like most really beautiful watches is this curve. So we also gave it a slight curvature, the front glass. I think those are some of the details.
Yeah, remember when we had fun with that reminds me when we had like basically 2 lenses, one for each eye. And obviously that makes the design, which is very with 2 eyes. And suddenly Sandro says to me, we found this lens. I found this solution where we only need 1 lens. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then I think, oh my God, we have to change everything. We have to now make this one thing. So we've gone through a lot of those sort of evolutionary steps. And I think every time we do, it gets better and better. So very good.
Yeah, it was great. That's another great segue into the evolution of the orb. A couple of things I wanted to point out on just from as a consumer of the orb, if you will. One, it goes back to the tilt a little bit. I know we talked about the significance of the tilt and it mirrors the Earth's axis, but the overall design and the technology inside the orb yields a very, I would say, let's just call it pleasant user experience. I don't know if everyone on the space has been to an optometrist to have your eye exam. Obviously, they want to take a picture of your eye, retina, check things out. And it's really hard to get your eye like next to the device, get it open wide enough. And in my case, so you have this super bright flash and it's just not very comfortable experience. But the tilt of the orb, which therefore tilts everything, you can just either stand, depending on how the orb's set up, or sit very comfortably in front of the orb at a very comfortable distance and go through the sign up process. So it's just, I mean, all of the great design, all the great internals lead to such a pleasant user experience. And sometimes I think that's like the mark of a great piece of software or hardware. It's like super complex. A lot of thought went into the design, but it's just so easy to use. And I think that's great testimony in terms of how well this device is engineered and designed. Shifting gears into the evolution. So let's talk a little bit about how the orb evolved over time. And Sandro, I think it was like a fifth version of the orb or sixth version? I know we update the software obviously continually, but like the hardware design, how many versions do we have like so far?
Yeah, I think we're at number 5 right now.
Okay.
We're working on the 6.
Okay, excellent. So what is some of the feedback, both for Thomas and Sandro? What's some of the feedback that you've gotten on the design of the orb? Like people, it could be around the UX, like what they like about it or how it looked or just the overall experience. But what's some of the feedback that you both have seen personally on the orb?
There's quite a lot, honestly. And interestingly, it's very, very diverse. So the first thing that's actually very interesting is that Twitter conversations are very different than conversations in person. When we meet people in person, they really enjoy kind of like almost like marveling at the orb, like turning it around, like looking at themselves like in the reflection. And they're quite intrigued and very curious. And it feels very refined and secure in that sense, which is very to what the intention was for that. What Thomas will point out as like an early version of the design that we continue to refine. And it's the current version that's out in like with Worldcoin operators and at conferences, but it's evolving in large part also to feedback that we have got, including on Twitter, that where some people mentioned that it can look intimidating. And we can definitely see where this is coming from. And this is great feedback. And so we're continuing to iterate on the next version to make the design of the orb more universal, which I think is something Thomas also pointed out earlier. So handing it over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Sandro. Because the object is so challenging, or the project is so challenging, and the object is so challenging, and what's inside is so challenging, I think we just have to allow ourselves to create something which foremost works. Today, it works. It does what it needs to do in a safe way, and performance-wise, it's doing it really well. But it also means that we had to work together to make that happen. And that is maybe the sort of the process to get it to where you really feel like, wow, this is doing what it's supposed to do really effectively, but also looks really awesome. And again, as a designer, I think it's really important for me to point out, like, I do this by putting myself in the shoes of the user. That could be your mom, that could be somebody in a different country, somebody somewhere which never seen anything like this. And it's really important that they feel a confidence and feel comfort in that this is okay, this is great. And I think so we still are working on that. We still kind of are moving in the direction where we feel like there is a way to continuously refine the object to really then speak to most of the people in the world, which I think would be, of course, a truly amazing point to be at. So that's where we're heading.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. And another just general note for everyone. I remember one of the things I ran across that was most impressive to me before joining WorldCoin, when I was beginning to talk to some of the team, was I found a video that Sandro did on, I think it was called orb disassembly, but it's actually the orb assembly too. It didn't go into, we're going to manufacture a lens, we're going to take that lens and put it in the box, but basically taking the components, laying them out, snapping them together. But it just shows like how everything, quote, rolls up into the orb. So that's definitely worth looking at if you're interested. Yeah, literally, if you Google WorldCoin orb disassembly, I think it's like the number one hit. So pretty easy to find. And definitely, if you're interested in design and the tech in the orb, it's definitely worth checking out. So segue there. Also a reminder, we will have time to get to audience questions, it looks like. So if you have any of those, get them in the Twitter thread now, because we're beginning to queue those up. So back to evolution of the orb. We talked about a good bit about the design and the internals. And I want to touch on, I mentioned personally to me, the UX was very pleasant. So how has the experience of interacting with the orb changed over time? Like how has that evolved?
And the start was quite interesting because the need for the operator to, which is them assisting in the process to make this all work and be safe and be effective, it was really important that they understood what happened. But I was like, the end user, the person who's going to use it, needs to understand what's happening. And so it was very much constructed a bit towards the user. And I think now we're heading in a direction where it's really together with the user. So the user is understanding what's going on, so that your mom, if take her together to do this, then she would understand, this is what's going on. And we've separated it out, these two things, the operator and the actual user. And that was because the process is quite complicated, then it was quite hard to do. But I think now we have a very simple user interface for the end user. And I think I always keep reminding everybody, because we keep working on this, and the programmer has to reprogram everything and everybody has to rethink everything and so forth. But the truth of the matter is that everybody who gets scanned is only going to be scanned once. That's the whole premises of the project. So that means that it's the first time they do that. And it needs to be universally understood at that moment from anybody in the world what's going on, and that this is all good sort of process and it's all okay. So that's what we're trying to reach. And I think we're on the way.
You had an excellent quote again in the blog post that I referenced earlier on worldcoin.org/blog website. It's one of the top few. So some of what you said, I think that quote was perfect. It said, we want to create separation between the advanced technology inside the orb and the experience of the person using it. It should feel very natural, personal, universal. And I think that has manifested itself in this very pleasant user experience that I mentioned. And again, I experienced it firsthand. And by the way, you don't have to be like a career tech person to have a pleasant UX. So it's not like you really do anything. You just participate in the sign up and it happens, which again is, I think it's a great mark of engineering and design overall. That is an experience you can have.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think what's happening now too is obviously the user will be part of this project through the app in the very start. And it's very important now that we develop the relationship between the app and the object, and reinforcing the user experience through the app. That when you basically use the app first, you go to the object, you get scanned, and then you go back to the app, and that's where everything is happening. And that's where we are heading, which is really positive.
All right, excellent. We've covered the main things we wanted to go over. So we do have a few questions that came in from the audience. And just a reminder, please put them in the Twitter thread if you have any. And they could be about any and all things orb design and engineering related. First question is probably for Sandro. It comes from Jake. It said, can you cover some of the tamper protections with the device? Obviously, it's your sophisticated device. So what are some of the tamper protections in the orb, Sandro?
Yeah, obviously can't go into too much details, but there's several sensors inside that will report if you open it. And actually, it's like tamper detection only is just one part of the security model of the orb. There's like hardware security or tamper security. Then you have like firmware security, hardening like the brain inside the orb, making sure that all the critical fault parts there are defended. Then there's a separate part for spoof prevention. So trying to trick the orb effectively. So this is why there's like multispectral sensors behind that curved glass. And then on the back end, there's some detection, some anomaly detection that we're also thinking about decentralizing, or how to decentralize that, which is actually a fascinating topic. Similar to decentralized audits, where everybody can really check orbs in person and can also verify and make sure that there's no orbs like generating fake identity somewhere. Because initially it's Tools for Humanity that operates the infrastructure for orbs, but eventually there will be multiple different organizations, and like how to make sure they're accountable and nobody kind of spoofs the system or generates fake identities is a fascinating topic, but we believe it can be accomplished.
All right. Very good. Thank you for that. Next question is from Gilbert. And I think what was being asked here. We have the orb, super portable, but you have to have an orb. What would be like some of the challenges of having this tech, like in a phone, for example, for accessibility reasons? I believe that was the question that was being asked. Why not try to design the orb work in phones for accessibility?
Yeah, that kind of goes back to what we just talked about in terms of security. That's really the main bottleneck there. Phones really only have one camera in the visible spectrum. The orb has multispectral cameras across the spectrum for spoof prevention, and then at the same time measures for hardware and firmware security, which are not available on the vast majority of phones. So it's really, really hard to make the system secure. So that's a challenge why it wouldn't work on phones. However, this does not preclude that from happening in the future. So when phone manufacturers add dedicated hardware for this use case in future phones, which has happened for other use cases in the past, this is something that could be tractable in the future. But today we need the orb.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. Next question is from Chesley. And it says, first of all, kudos to the designers and awesome evolution to the orb throughout time. So thank you very much for that. The question is, I have a concern, will the Worldcoin team create an orb that accommodates everyone? For example, someone who might have had some kind of eye injury or something along those lines, or some kind of maybe something about the eye related to a defect or disease, I assume, was the gist of the question.
Yeah. So one of the major design optimizations, when very early on we thought about, okay, how do we verify proof of personhood? How do we verify a human as unique and as a human, basically, and it's not a spoof, etc. We thought about multiple different ways how to do that. A very prominent one, how is done today in that use case and for more things, is know your customer verification. So where you present your ID, etc., and verify that you're actually the legitimate owner of that ID. There actually is less than 50% in the world who can actually participate in such verification digitally, because less than 50% of the world has digitally verifiable ID. So it's actually a very large portion of people that would be excluded in that design. So biometrics, and in particular, actually iris biometrics, is the most inclusive way to build a proof of personhood system. So that was the main optimization. So it's already more inclusive than basically anything else, at least anything that satisfies certain security requirements. That being said, of course, there's challenges. Some diseases, actually, it's not an issue. For others, that's different. It's a very small portion, but of course, Worldcoin is meant for everyone. This is something it's not possible today, but we're thinking about ways how to solve in the future. So you can have a special verification process for people who can have a certificate from a doctor is, yes, you actually have eye disease. You would go to a particularly special location where there's separately trained people who could verify you. But this is still active design process.
Okay. All right. Great answer. So the last question is from Kelly. And I finally a question I can actually answer part of, I think. If I understood it, I probably misunderstood it, so it's not the right one. Where and how does World ID fit into the development stages of the orb? I can answer from my side. Again, I'm the protocol side of things. So software, not hardware, and definitely not design. But where and how does World ID fit into the development stages of the orb? The orb and the whole process, the problem the orb was designed to solve actually led to the realization of how important a Sybil resistant proof of personhood signal really was as a primitive in Web3. We look at the opportunity we have to really redefine what identity is in the Web3 space and beyond. It's a key enabler to more sophisticated and advanced and newer Web3 applications that aren't even really thought of now. And it's also a platform or a base upon which you can build and stack other credentials, knowing that they're tied to a unique human. And then an area that I work in quite a bit is around privacy, zero knowledge technology, et cetera, where a person is in control of not only their proof of personhood signal, but other credentials they might stack upon that as well and can disclose that, in a privacy preserving fashion. So it's very highly related, and World ID actually grew out of the work on the orb and the challenge trying to solve to uniquely identify everyone. I don't know, Sandro, if you have any others. Obviously, you've been around the project way longer than I have, but
yeah, I think that's a great answer.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we're right up on time. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thanks for letting me hop on and ask some questions. Thomas, we don't have time for it today, but in a future space or when we catch up in the office sometime, I want to talk to you about how you got into surfboard design, but time doesn't allow it today. But nonetheless, I want to thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Sandro, for taking time to hop on the space. Thanks for Worldcoin again for sponsoring. And thanks for everyone that joined live on the space today. And for those that have the opportunity to listen to the recording in the future, we appreciate your interest. Thank you. Have a great day.